Welcome to all, and who would like to run the roll call? Is that Mr. Newberry still?
I believe I'm doing that this evening. So
Well, thank you.
you're welcome. Chair Ritter,
Present.
Board Member Loja,
Here.
Board Member McCown Foster, Board Member Senene. Sorry, I don't think he's here this evening. Alternate Welker, Alternate Bartlesmeyer,
Here.
Alternate Marion,
Here.
Council Liaison Clark,
Here.
Commission Liaison Lee.
Present.
All right, that's all.
Okay, I think that the first line of business is the action on the February 11th meeting. Do we have a motion to accept those meeting minutes?
If there are no comments or revisions, I'll make a motion to approve.
To my knowledge, there's no amendments to the minutes.
Mr. Chair, if there's a second to that motion, we can do a voice vote then.
I'll second.
Thank you, ma'am.
All those who say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll abstain.
Thank you all.
The agenda items for tonight, I believe there's one that is a review of a monument sign for the Monarch Fire Station out on Wild Horse Creek Road. Joe, would you like to lead us through that presentation?
Yes, sir. Thank you. And while I'm doing that, I think Mr. Newberry or Ms. Keefe or both will be promoting representatives from the Monarch Fire Protection District. And so while that's going on, I'll just give you a brief overview of why we're asking you to review a monument sign tonight. First, the fire station is yet to be built on the property, but as part of the process that will lead us eventually to some development on the property, the fire district has requested a certain set of variances relating to the building, the parking lot area, and the monument sign. The rationale for the variance is that the fire district would like to move the building closer to the edge of right-of-way of Wild Horse Creek Road. It achieves several improved site design features. Principally, it reduces the height of the retaining wall that's located south of the building. It limits the amount of impervious surface on the site. And we're thinking we'll be able to save more of the existing woodland area that defines the southern end of the property. When the building moves forward, the parking associated with it does as well. And in this case, the monument sign. So fast forward, or I should say step back to 2020, the city of Wildwood undertook a major revision of its sign regulations. And as part of that, one of the items that was added to those regulations was any applicant seeking a variance to a sign needed first to come before the Architectural Review Board. The Architectural Review Board is then given the opportunity to offer comments, suggestions, and recommendations regarding the monument sign. It is not necessarily a formal action. Formal action still is at the Board of Adjustment, but before the Board of Adjustment can act on the variance request, or in this case, the sign, the Architectural Review Board must offer its opinion. Again, comments, suggestions, or recommendations. And so tonight, that is why you are here. You are the first board to have to basically offer this type of review, since the regulation is from April 2020. The sign itself is a monument type, which is authorized with institutional uses. The sign roughly has a 10-foot width, approximately 6-foot height, and the face of the sign, that which we calculate for purposes of its area, is approximately 20 square feet, well below the 50 square foot allowance that is in the sign regulations of the zoning ordinance. Suffice to say that your input is very important to the Board of Adjustment. It will be provided to the Board of Adjustment, that 5-member volunteer board. And from there, they will basically take into account your information that's provided tonight, as well as that of the petitioner, the Monarch Fire Protection District, and any that is offered by the public as part of the public hearing that is scheduled on this particular matter a week from today. So, Mr. Chair, it's a very brief overview of why you're being asked to kind of review this particular sign. It's also a little bit of history on the site itself. And then hopefully enough of the information on the sign proper that it helps you with your consideration. I'll close by just saying that we did provide you a number of other items. You have the site plan for the variance that is being proposed for the 3 items. Again, building, parking, and signage. You have the rendering that was provided by the architectural firm working with the fire district, the application that is required, the sign details, and then along with that, the actual elevations for the fire station itself, which was before this board previously and approved by a different group of architects, landscape architects, planners, and etc. So we hope we gave you enough information to kind of put everything in context, but certainly between Ms. Keith, Mr. Newberry, and I, and certainly the petitioners, and then Mr. Lee, who's on our Planning and Zoning Commission, hopefully we can fill in any blanks that I've left and you have questions about. So thank you.
I only had a couple of questions related to what was submitted. One was the distance from the edge of the property. It's 6.6 feet. That's awfully close to the road. Is that a concern for anybody?
Well, Mr. Chair, I would defer to Mr. Mandel, the architect that's been working for the fire district on the entirety of the property. And I would also note that Chief Spiegel and Deputy Chief Cruz are on the screen as well. Mr. Mandel, would you like to respond to the question?
Sure thing. Thank you for having us with you this evening. The monument sign proximity to the roadway is certainly something to take into account, but there's a balance to be struck in our professional opinion and in the aim of the district and having that signage there. In other words, it is a sort of a public information sign. If you had a chance to peek at the renderings and the design, it's got a digital display system that you see in a lot of commercial signage that can be used to pass, in this case, public safety messages to the community as they drive by, both eastbound and westbound on Wild Horse Creek. The dimension that is shown, the 6 foot 8 inches or 6.6 feet approximately from the property line, is roughly 15 to 20 feet from edge of pavement, and probably more like 18 to 22 feet from edge of vehicle right-of-way. So I want to make sure that it's sort of acknowledged and understood that it's not necessarily as if the sign is 6 feet from the roadway, from the path of travel of vehicles. It is 6 foot 8 inches. What we're asking for is to place it 6 foot 8 inches from the property line. And that was sort of precipitated by this idea of moving the entire development of the site towards the roadway, as Joe alluded to. So at the risk of going on too long, I want to stop there, but I can definitely talk more about it if you'd be interested.
No, that's fine. I think you clarified my concern. The other concern that I had was, has anybody thought about some of these signs. I'm across the street from another Monarch station right now that does not have a sign. And while this is an informational sign, they have a tendency to be pretty bright, and that's a relatively quiet area of Wild Horse Creek Road. Is that going to be a concern for the neighbors?
Well, Mr. Chair, I will tell you first and foremost, the city of Wildwood does not allow electronic message boards. So the facing of the sign's going to change because there's no provision in our sign regulations for what they're proposing. But it's a good question because that's one of the reasons we don't allow electronic message boards. Most of our institutional uses are in the non-urban resident district areas, which are rural primarily, and certainly dark environments at night.
So Joe, the LED portion in the section drawings and the elevations of the sign would be removed?
Yes, it has to be switched out with something more static, such as pin-on letters on a raceway or something akin to that.
And I didn't see an indication of any type of uplighting on the flag either. So I assume that's not part of the group.
No, obviously the flag will be lit, but we also, as part of our process, when the site development plan is submitted, we send all lighting components to Randy Burkett Lighting Design to ensure compliance to our outdoor lighting requirements.
The only other concern that I had related to the details that I saw were make sure that the flashing is good on that opening for the LED screen, but if LED is going away, it's probably going to be revised to something else anyway.
I just wanted to ask, just to clarify, I'm assuming that the materials are going to match what was proposed for the fire station.
Yeah, if I can answer that directly, Alex, that is correct. The masonry materials would all match, the cast stone would all match the masonry materials called out for the building. And I think the renderings, I know the rendering that we did for the sign most recently is accurate with respect to sun exposure. The problem is that when the sign itself is in full illumination, the building is somewhat in shadow. So I don't know that that communicated probably all of that, but yes, the brick and the clay and the architectural cast stone would all be matched for the building materials. And I want to keep answering questions, but I do have a question for you all about the LED portion when the time is right.
Ask away.
So I guess one of our aims with this request was to have the design of the sign approved. And I guess we were not aware that we wouldn't be able to call for LED on the sign itself at all. I guess the desire was to have dialogue with this body and then ultimately with the city in general about how we could affect what the district would like to do, which is this type of sign, and still respect not only the non-urban residential character of the neighborhood, but also the actual neighbors, and make sure that we're being a good neighbor. So if there's any conversation to be had about constructing the sign as proposed, but having a timeout, like a daytime, nighttime mode, so to speak. I can speak to that somewhat in terms of the how-to and the technical, but maybe the higher level question is whether that would be something that both the Architectural Review Board and then the city in general would be willing to entertain. But like I said, we were not aware that that was a complete non-starter. So I apologize for that, but I thought we were talking about the sign as proposed as a potential with, I guess, maybe some brightness adjustments, some controls, some kind of daytime, nighttime, or light sensitivity, adjustments, or complete shutdown in the evenings, kind of a night mode, rather than replacing it with static lettering. I will kind of throw that at you as a question. Are we able to have that dialogue, since that is what's put before you in terms of the design and the intent?
Joe, I'm going to have to ask for your input as to what our prerogatives are at this point in time.
Well, certainly if the board feels compelled to support an electronic message board, I can certainly put that down in the notes, but there's no mechanism to accommodate it. I will tell the board members that on 3 occasions, the Department of Planning has brought to the Planning and Zoning Commission um, recommendations for electronic message boards. And in all 3 instances, they've not been endorsed by the Planning and Zoning Commission and therefore not by the City Council. So I don't know if it would be productive discussion because you could say you like the concept, but there's still nothing to enable it.
I personally like the concept, but I have the same worries as everyone else with brightness. So I don't mind it, but yeah, I want those problems or that problem resolved before approval, or giving our opinion on it. I would assume, well, I'm not going to assume, I would think that this proposal would probably possibly change if that's not approved. So I'd assume we can't really, I guess we could approve it as proposed. So
Well, again, and
If-
hopefully,
John.
Mr. Bartlesmeyer, I wasn't too unclear, but actually your role tonight is not to approve the sign. Your role is to provide any comments, suggestions, or recommendations for the Board of Adjustment.
Okay.
So I will not be seeking a formal motion tonight, but I do want to hear all of your comments because then I can transcribe them. Ms. Keith and I then will present them to the Board of Adjustment a week from tonight.
Well, the sign is presented in the rendering. Looked fine to me. There was no detail, of course, on how it's constructed, other than, I mean, the shell is constructed, but with the LED image board, we really don't know how it's going to be constructed. But the image was fine other than that.
Before I defer to Ms. Clark, who's want to comment, I will just note that the rationale for the overhaul of our sign regulations was to make everything content neutral. So from the standpoint of the city, we don't really look at what the sign depicts or presents. It's really not something we can do under an action of the United States Supreme Court. But in this particular case, the assumption is that there'll be pinned on letters or letters pinned on a raceway, or it could be changeable copy, that type which you open the sides of the sign and you basically place letters like Lafayette High School has on Clayton Road. But there is no mechanism for the electronic message board at this time.
Joe, just to clarify, the LED light source is fine. It's the computerized driver that changes the text that we do not allow. So LEDs are fine as a light source. So just want to clarify.
And Mr. Lee, that's a good clarification. I try to limit my context to electronic message boards, but we do accommodate LED lighting as the source of illumination. Thank you, Mr. Lee.
Since you can't take a motion, does anybody else have any comments that they wish to pass forward to Mr. Vonich before we close this issue?
Ms. Clark has her hands up.
Hi, thanks, Chair. I drove over there today and I drove up Etherton Road and sat there at the stop sign looking back to the west. And it's difficult to see at that point because of the angle your car sets on that slope without a sign. And I would just, I don't know, I think maybe looking at reducing the size of the sign, the closer it gets to the road or the closer it gets to a site impingement, maybe look at reducing the size of the sign itself. I mean, we're reducing the requirement if this is approved from 50 feet site or yard, front yard, the distance between the sign and the right of way from 50 feet to 6.6 feet, a reduction of 86.8%. So that's a lot of distance that we're looking at reducing what we've already established as what we want, which is 50 feet. So I think that we need to look at some alterations in the size or the shape or maybe the permeability of it, so that maybe it's a see-through sign. I don't know what we can look at, but it just seems too big for that location to me. Right now, currently on the existing firehouse, the sign, as I think, is on the building itself. It's just letters on the building itself, which has worked so far without any problem that I know of. With the sign, the road sign that show in both directions that it is a firehouse at that location. So I guess I have a problem with the 15 feet, moving it forward, moving the building forward and moving that sign forward. And my question is, on these drawings that we have, is that 15 feet of movement of the whole structure forward toward Wild Horse Creek Road, is that represented on these the drawings that we have in front of us now?
Mrs. Clark, the site plan sheet or the flat plan sheet should indicate the adjustment both for, excuse me, not just both, but for all three, the signage, the building, and the parking space. There's a couple of parking spaces that encroach into the 50-foot front yard setback as well. So I've marked up mine, but this is the one that has the red cloud diagrams with the red font indicating different distances and notes. Oh, thank you. Share screen.
So Joe, the rest of the pages that are not part of that document that we got in the package, those are previous drawings, right?
That's correct, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And one more question about this. You know, that being on the Historic Preservation Commission previously, this area just down Etherton Road is a historic area, the Oroville Historic Area. And I know that, you know, back in the 1860s, 70s, that whole property was part of that Oroville land, all the way up to the Antioch Baptist Church. And I was wondering, are there any, with the historicity of this property, are there any restrictions we have on the architecture of this building and the signage due to the historic regulations?
Ms. Clark, as part of the review by the Planning and Zoning Commission, we did not impose any specific requirements relative to architecture for the purposes of the Oroville Historic District. Thank you.
I have one additional question. Is part of the design driver behind the monumental sign the computerized LED signage? So is that part of the reason why the monumental sign was proposed to be out there was for the digital messaging?
If I can answer that directly, Lindsay, that is correct. You'll see at I'd say a predominance of newer fire and ambulance facilities, the desire to be able to have a public service messaging component. So yes, the intent is for it to be assigned to indicate the firehouse itself. However, the architecture and some signage on the building should hopefully communicate that. Frankly, the architecture by itself should communicate that it is a fire facility, but the monument sign is intended to be a public service messaging point. Frequently you see things like buckle up, seatbelts save lives, change the batteries on your smoke detector, but there are more pointed, more timely messages that are put out there. So that you are correct 100% that one of the major aims of the sign, the monument sign as proposed, is to communicate with the community, both as they pass by and as they repeatedly pass by if they're neighbors.
Thank you.
I don't know if anyone can see my hand up, but I just wanted to comment to this as well. I am definitely not in favor of the LED message board. This is a really highly residential area. The fire station is already moving it, so to speak, and we're okay with that. But I think have an LED message board that is not even welcome in town center is not a reasonable request for our area over here.
Thank you, ma'am. And
Like
if
with
I
the
may,
new plan.
to respond to Ms. Marion's comment and then Mr. Mandel's response, regardless if it's an electronic message board or not, once the building shifted forward, unless there's an absence of signage, the sign would need a variance, even if it were placed on the building, so to speak, because the building is in the setback as well. Thank you.
Joe, can you hear me? I have a question. It looks like the building on the new layout was flipped 180 degrees from what they presented before. Is that correct?
As you know, we had a significant amount of discussion about how best to place the parking so it had the least amount of impact on the residential property to the south and toward the west. And so the parking ended up on the east side of the building, which is next to Etherton Road.
Okay. What it looks like was originally they had a sign proposed that was further west, which would assist in Ms. Clark's comment, from blocking traffic view corridors from Etherton Road. And when they flip the building, they kind of flip the sign, it looks like. They probably need to put the sign on the western side of the drive, which would take it out of the sight line corridor for any vehicle sitting at the Etherton trying to get onto Wild Horse. I think that's kind of a public safety issue. You might want to look at that and go out and photograph that sight line, because I don't think you'll be able to see anything looking to the west with cars sitting on that hill trying to merge onto Wild Horse.
Mr. Lee, comment noted, and if Mr. Mandel has any response, I'd be glad to hear it as I'm sure you all would too.
I'd like to address the comment directly, and then I'd be happy to follow up with some photographs and some diagrams. But part of the assessment that we've done, both when the living quarters of the firehouse was on the west side of the building and now that it's on the east side of the building, which is a much longer conversation about the past so many months of design and evolution. But when the signage was on either side and when the living quarters was on either side of the building, we looked at view shed as vehicles would approach that stop sign northbound on Etherton and be turning either left or right, but especially left onto Wild Horse Creek westbound. And what I would say to you is that the placement of a vehicle and more importantly, the placement of the driver of that vehicle as they're at the stop sign at Etherton is actually ahead of, so north of the sign. So there should not be any obstruction other than maybe of a fire truck, kind of a portion of a fire truck if it were parked in the apparatus ramp. So in other words, the vehicle on Etherton preparing to turn either left or right onto Wild Horse Creek would not have their view of traffic on Wild Horse Creek obstructed by the sign. The way that the road is bowed, you know, that the curve essentially, we're at the convex, I guess, portion of the road, or depending on which side of the road you're on, but we're kind of in that bottomed out where it goes up to the, I think, northeast and northwest. It's not a straight shot. So the design opinion, and I guess the comfort that we have with the placement is it will not obstruct anything. And I mentioned seeing maybe part of a fire truck obstructed. You would see up close, you know, the sign in front of a fire truck, but a fire truck is anywhere from, you know, 25 to 35 or more feet long. So it would not obstruct the entirety of a fire truck. There'd be no way to miss essentially a fire truck preparing to turn either right on Wild Horse Creek eastbound or to turn out left. So I'm sensitive to the issues of the LED, and I do have a couple more questions for you, but I think just from a physical obstruction standpoint, there's no blockage to drivers that were up at that stop sign, turning left or right onto Wild Horse Creek, or really looking left, looking west. And I'd be happy to, you know, prove that, so to speak, with some diagrams and some photographs if desirable.
Joe, I think that would be helpful if this moves forward. If he has those diagrams, and that question will not come up again.
I agree with that. If we have the diagrams, it would be very, very helpful. And, you know, I guess I'm not so concerned about not seeing the fire truck because, yeah, it's big. We're going to hear it unless we're deaf or hard of hearing. And it will be visible. It's a small car. And if you're in a small car, you're very low. And at that angle you're sitting at that stop sign, it's hard to see around that corner, even with nothing there.
Well, Mr. Chair, if Mr. Mandel has information that we could see on share screen, if there's no objection amongst the board members, we could certainly arrange that to happen tonight.
I'd be fine with that. I'm just not sure if he'd be prepared to address that.
Yeah, to be clear, I don't have those photos or diagrams at my fingertips. I would be generating that. A lot of this was from when the, from the foregoing months of presentations and so forth. So I'd have to pull those together and be happy to share them with you between now and a future conversation. Ideally, I guess before next week's public hearing, but I know that this board doesn't get together again for several weeks.
Well, we can certainly provide them to the board members, so at least you have information to respond to your questions or concerns.
It'd be great.
I had a question, if I may. Mr. Lee made a comment about not the LEDs themselves, but the driver, I guess, what would send a signal to change text. And I just want to make sure I understand, unless that's enumerated somewhere that I can go and read it. I don't know if I understand the distinction there. So it's not that there's a limitation on LED illumination. There's a limitation on the use of a computer driver that would send, I guess, either color or intensity or light, brightness changing. If you could expound on that or maybe direct me to where I can research a little more, I would appreciate it.
So Joe, you can get him the sign ordinance, but electronic message boards would have a public message, like say the high school, tonight's prom, drive safe. That was not passed through the Planning and Zoning Commission, and it had no support at council. So our signage criteria in the city is basically just a sign, but there's no computer messaging, driven options that we even have. So it's strictly prohibited in Wildwood. So, you know, you can say, your sign can look exactly like what you're showing, Monarch Fire Protection District, you know, and you can put that on there. But if you wanted to change out your letters, you're kind of forced to do what the high school does, and that is go outside and change the letters.
Like with a more traditional marquee with press in letters or some sort of slide in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's just no avenue to go with the computer generated signage. And I know that's the future of signage, but it doesn't have any support in Wildwood. I don't think you'll get anywhere with presenting it.
Understood. And then there was another question, Bill, I don't know if it was yours, but there was a question about the construction of the sign.
Yeah, the construction of the sign shows placement for signage monitors, basically, back to back. And I was just concerned that I didn't see much in the way of flashing of that, but considering the fact that you're not likely to get the monitors, and you're probably going to end up with a static sign, it's a different issue.
Understood. Yeah, for reference, those are outdoor modules that don't really require, that basically they could stand on their own on a pole, essentially. So we're building a pretty box around them, or proposing to. Flashing comment notwithstanding, the idea is to basically create a cavity system that lets water shed off the sign like it would in, if it were completely exposed, and then weep out the bottom of the cavity. But yeah, I will better educate myself and the fire district on what the limitations are on using signs like this, and on kind of what the limitations are and what the allowances are, let's say, and we'll take a look at that. We'll also take a look at where it shows and placement, and create some and resurrect those diagrams, create some photographic exhibits for this board to digest.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vonich, where do we go from here?
I believe Ms. Clark has another comment, but I'll respond to that after all the comments are complete. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
My comment is just, thank you, Mr. Chair. My comment is just, if you don't have the message board, if that's the purpose of the message board, or the sign to be in that location and to be that size, if you don't have the message board, is there a way to just put the signage on the front of the building instead, so that this is not an issue?
Absolutely. I think that, there are options, let's say, and it would really be, it wouldn't be my place as the architect for the district to say what they will do, but I can certainly say that would be an option to look at, placement of signage in alternative ways. There is intent to put signage on the building, I should clarify. But I think that Chief Cruz and Chief Spiegel are on the call as well, and they probably can speak to what their thoughts may be.
I'm sorry, I spoke out of turn there with saying that there would be no issues. As I understand, it would still be a variance because the building is being closer than the 50 feet allowed distance from the right of way. But thank you.
Mr. Vunich, this is Les Cruz. If I could speak now, please. Okay. You're muted, but I'm going to assume that was a yes. No, echoing what Josh said, information messaging is a big part of what we do in our business today. And that is key on anything and everything we do, education and prevention. This sign will help us facilitate that if a messaging board was allowed. Something as simple as, like Mr. Mandel said, buckle your seat belts, or anything that is going on with real-time information, weather related, flash flooding, and messages of that type. And I understand, right now, the way that the ordinances are written, that the city of Wildwood does not allow that. I would ask maybe at some level at city government, that maybe that would be looked at again. But as far as signs, William, and I apologize, I did not catch your last name, or I would address you with your last name and your title. But most of our fire stations, and I think Mrs. Clark also said that, the one directly across from House 5 does not have a front yard sign. All of our newer facilities do. So our older facilities do not have the signs. All of the newer ones do. And most fire stations being built today do have some type of a sign as proposed tonight, sitting in their front yard.
I would say that the information given to you tonight does not look encouraging, but if you're going to go before, is it planning and zoning, Mr. Vonich, that would address this? You at least have some more information that can help you tune your presentation.
And, you know, I'm going back with what Mr. Lee said, and I'm not an architectural engineer. I just run into burning buildings for a living. But I want to believe in today's technology that there is the sophistication out there. If a sign, whether it be LED, messaging, non-messaging, was put on that site with the reducing of the lumens at a certain time at predetermined intervals, however we would want to do that, that technology is there that would afford us to be able to put that style of sign in that front yard. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr.
Thank you.
Yeah, we reviewed this and there just is not any support, you know, with the city. I tend to agree with you personally. You know, we do lots of buildings, we have lots of signs. This is the future of signage, but there isn't any support in council, and I think it will turn people off from having a sign altogether if you go down that path. That's just my opinion.
Okay. And I agree with you. I think that's where technology is heading today with that style of sign, but we're not going to fix that tonight.
One other question I would ask. So our aim in a big picture sense is moving the entirety of the development of the site. So the building, the retaining wall, all of the parking and the associated drive pavement forward towards Wild Horse Creek Road. And that prompted this conversation because it meant that the sign was now going to be in the right of way, or I'm sorry, in the setback area. If you eliminated the monument sign from the conversation, we understand that having signage of any type within that setback area is going to require a variance. Is it, and this is, I guess, a procedural question, is it better to go through the process of the public hearing next week and discuss whether or not the building moving forward is going to be approved? And if so, then revisit the idea of a variance for signage on the building, because we in September, October of last year, when the Architectural Review Board looked at the building design and now are showing signage building mounted. So irrespective of a monument sign, there is intention to put building, you know, letters and numerals on the building. I guess that in the fall of last year was not really on the radar, so to speak, from a variance perspective, because it wasn't within the building setback area. So I guess procedurally, should we be talking about this variance request for signage on the building because it would, by virtue of moving the building forward, be in the building setback area? Or should we wait until the variance for moving the building is either approved or not approved and then cross the bridge of signage on the building after that fact?
I think that's a question for Joe more so than the board. Mr. Vonich, can you address that?
Well, certainly, Mr. Chair, I can give my opinion, but I would move forward as advertised, because regardless, I think the facility needs some type of signage, whether it's wall mounted, ground mounted, or both. And so I think they can address it at that time next Thursday. So I would proceed forward as is.
Okay, so I misunderstood. I thought that this board would consider that variance this is just more commentary on the style of the sign and so forth, the monument sign.
Exactly.
Okay.
Under the new regulations, any sign seeking a variance needs to come to the Architectural Review Board first so that they can provide comments, suggestions, or recommendations regarding it. But there's no formal action.
So does this board feel like it's processed and kind of chewed on the building mounted signage that's proposed? Because it is shown in both elevation and rendering at this point, understanding that next week's public hearing is really where that variance is, a disposition is sought. But have you had a chance to consider the building mounted signage, and do you have any discussion? You know, in other words, would it be a good use of this time for that? I don't want to extend the meeting more than it needs to. I'm just, since we're all gathered, I think it'd be valuable to talk about it if it's appropriate to do so.
Well, in terms of the wall-mounted signage, the board did not receive that information, again, because we focused on the monument sign. But certainly, if in the end you do not want a monument sign or you want both, we can certainly come back to the review board for that.
Okay, I thought that was contained within the information submitted, the building mounted signage as well.
Well, again, we're just focused on what was presented, and what you have before us is a building in the front yard setback, several parking spaces in the front yard setback, and a monument sign in the front yard setback. I don't believe your application identified the wall signage.
Not a public safety issue with, oncoming traffic blocking, view corridors and things like that. If it's out of the way, I don't have an objection to the sign, and the materials match the building, so.
I'd agree with Mr. Lee. My opinion on the wall mounted signing, if you get approval to move the building up, I don't see why it's an issue for the wall mounting signing. As for the signing as proposed outside of the LED, me personally, I have no issue with it. I think it's actually a good thing for there to be signage closer for a firehouse closer to the street, so that there's more notification for the city. The distance as it's proposed, I don't have an issue. As Mr. Mendel pointed out, from the actual concrete, it's going to be of the road, it's actually 18 feet away, because there's the additional 12-foot setback from the road for the property line. So I don't have an issue with view lines. I mean, I guess I think we can still see the study, but personally, I don't think it's gonna be an issue. But yeah, I agree. The wall mounting, I don't think it's gonna be that big of an issue. It's more, are you gonna get the variance to actually allow for the building to be moved up? So.
Okay, I appreciate the dialogue. I looked back at the rendering and the materials that were submitted. There's some imagery that shows the signage. I guess we didn't call attention to that being part of the discussion tonight, but happy to revisit that conversation in the future or share that image. It actually should be part of the packet that was distributed, I believe. But I appreciate the dialogue, and I would hope that would be the case, that a building mounted set of letters would be kind of the least of hurdles to overcome, right? So thank you for that. All right, well, I am happy to answer other questions, but I will aim to follow up for everyone's benefit through Robin and through Travis with some, view shed kind of diagrams and imagery. And then if that, ends up being something to discuss in the future, would be welcome, or would welcome the opportunity.
Well, again, to the board, if we have that information already from previous submittals by the fire district, we will provide it. Again, from the perspective of the Architectural Review Board, the location is not an issue per se for you. You can comment on it, but I don't necessarily want to have the fire district spend additional money to produce something that, for all intents and purposes, will be a decision of the Board of Adjustment and the Planning and Zoning Commission.
So if there are no more comments,
So, Mr. Chair, members of the board, you've given us a lot of information tonight. Ms. Keefe will summarize all of the conversation's major points, and we'll provide that to you, hopefully at the beginning of next week, so you can see that we've addressed all of your comments, suggestions, or recommendations. And then we'll provide that to the Board of Adjustment in advance of their meeting on July 15th.
thank you very much.
If there are no other questions, I believe we've completed our task tonight, and we're very appreciative of your attendance. And just to let you know, we're starting to get some interest in new projects, and I believe the Prime Place will be back to you all, if not in August, certainly in September.
Mr. Chair, there's one other item on the agenda for the selection of the officers for the Architectural Review Board.
And how do we go about doing that, Travis?
Well, Mr. Chair, since we have a couple of our regular members not in attendance tonight, I would probably defer to the next meeting, hopefully having more of the regular members in attendance. Because again, officers cannot be alternates. So,
And I suggest we table that issue until the next meeting.
if the board doesn't object, the department would appreciate it. Again, because the vote on officers is actually, if all regular members are here, are only by the regular members. So, like I say, we just need we need a few more. We probably need as full a board as we can have for the election of officers if possible. So with that, I just, again, would appreciate, we'll put it on the next agenda, and we'll probably put it at the top of the agenda so the new elected chair can manage the meeting.
Right. In that case, I'll call for a motion to end the meeting.
I'll make a motion.
If we second,
Second.
all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? I hear no one. That calls the end of the meeting then.
Thank you all very much, and have a nice weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Josh, it's nice to see you again. He's probably gone.
All right, good night all. I will
Good night.